Hi, everybody, and welcome to our webinar today, where we are lucky enough to be joined by our gold sponsors, NICE, and we are going to have a session on AI, more specifically, the evolution of the intelligent contact center. Ben, I even love the title. I'm going to introduce our wonderful speaker, Ben, very shortly. But firstly, in the spirit of reconciliation, Auscontact acknowledges the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and their connections to land, sea, and community. We pay our respect to their elders past and present and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples here today. Today's webinar will run for approximately 60 minutes, and during that time, with the help of today's guest, we hope that the session provides you with some interesting insights and gives you the opportunity to ask some questions of an expert, always a great opportunity, but gives you some great thinking to actually take away and think about your own environment and where you see those opportunities. To round off the session, we'll have Q&A at the end of the webinar. So I'm Fran Southwood. I am the CEO of Auscontact, and I will be your moderator for today. I'm just going to run through a few general housekeeping items with you. Remember to interact with us today to maximise the benefits. And as you know, we don't need you to take too many notes because we will actually provide you with a copy of the recording of the webinar after the session. You all know how to use the Q&A and the chat feature by now, well and truly practiced, but we want you to use that during the session. You can ask questions, you can make comments for Ben or for myself, and where it makes sense, I'll actually ask your questions in real time. If they're totally sort of non-related to the topic or the content that Ben's actually talking about, we'll keep those for the end and cover them off in a formal Q&A session. I would encourage you to type those questions as you think of them. If you're anything like me, I always forget the question that I thought of, and it was always a great question. So make sure you write it down. And as I said, if it's relevant, I will jump straight in. We can cover it off there and then. If you're listening through headphones or speakers and you have any trouble while the session's ongoing, just note the raise hand button and one of the Auscontact team will help you out. Alternatively, you can actually just revert to the numbers that were in your registration and dial in if that's easier. Now today, we also are going to definitely be promoting best questions. So NICE have got a gift for the best question asked. Ben's going to be the moderator, so I'm pretty sure he doesn't take bribes, but he'll make a call after the session. But as you can see there on the screen, $200 MasterCard voucher for the best question asked. So that's a bit of a bonus. But always a good opportunity to take advantage of having almost a captive audience in an expert. So I'm now going to hand over to Ben. I'm going to introduce our wonderful speaker, Ben Hancock. Ben is the manager in ANZ for digital analytics and AI at NICE. Ben has, however, been in the industry for a really long time. He's got experience working across multiple aspects of AI and also really in the analytics space. So I want you to really utilise this time as an opportunity to ask those questions that you haven't asked before. There might be things that have been burning and you've thought, I can't ask that, it's a crazy question. Now is your chance to really sort of dig deep and build on anything that not only you hear today, but again, you've got access to Ben while we're here. So Ben, without any further ado, I'm going to hand over to you. Really excited to hear this session today.
Thanks, Fran, and thanks to Auscontact for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. I think for today's session, whilst I am at NICE and I do manage the digital analytics and AI portfolio there, as you mentioned, I do have a background in contact center and telco, analytics, and of course, digital contact center. I started my first contact center role when I was 16 doing outbound NPS surveys for the telcos. And so, things have come a long way since having to push the buttons to dial a number and hope that people wouldn't hang up at me at 7:30 at night while everyone was eating dinner. So it's quite a trip to think about, having started there and being here now and getting to talk about all the new and interesting things. And really the purpose of today is I'm hoping to educate people and answer questions that come through that really provide, I suppose, a perspective on customer experience, AI, how digital fits into that world, and what are some of the key takeaways and things you can think about in order to translate that into your own businesses. So, right, let's dive right in.
Let's do
So,
it.
a big topic of conversation is customer experience. And it's such a broad term, but really in a lot of organizations, customer experience was a function of the business. It was a part of the business. You had customer experience, and then you had customer, you had service and sales. We've got IT, we've got digital, marketing, risk, compliance. And customer experience really sort of sat as a function of a business. But in today's world, really it is the business. And Gartner recently released a study that showed that 81% of customers make decisions about which organizations they'll continue to do business with based on the quality of that customer experience. Now, that might not sound like a stat that seems worth mentioning, but what we're dealing with is a situation where customers are becoming less and less loyalty based and more experience based. They're becoming more fickle with the businesses that they do business that they buy from and that they work with because of a bad experience. One bad experience can completely erase years of positive customer experience if it's bad enough. Now, of course, that gets even more complicated when we look at the proliferation of all these different channels and ways that customers can contact our organizations. And we are promoting these. We're saying, reach out to us on Facebook, reach out to us on the website, click on this link and fill out a web form. And of course, customers are then crafty and they'll find channels to contact your business, whether you realize that they were there or not. We all have that, that old story with an airline where, maybe something happened that we didn't like. And the only way to get through to them was to post on their Facebook or to, make a tweet, or I don't know what we call it now with X, but still a tweet to me. And they'll find a way to contact you, maybe through a web form you thought you deleted, or a mobile or a phone number that you didn't think you still had advertised, or an email address that's no longer being used. But really what it presents is a challenge to manage all of the different ways that customers will try to contact our businesses and get their query or their problem or their issue resolved. So the question is, how do we manage that? Now, you get this really challenging structure of platforms and point solutions within most organizations, from top end of town all the way down to small to medium enterprises, where over years and months, there's all of these different platforms that are built over time, and a lot of them don't integrate with each other. They don't talk to each other. They don't share data with each other. There's core platforms that do certain functions, and there's workforce optimizations that do different things. And of course, there's different org channels. And managing that becomes really hard, and it's very disjointed, and it really gets in the way of innovating in many cases, because if we can't access the right thing in the right way, in the right time, at the right place, then we can't serve that up through, say, an automated journey or a conversational IVR or an assistance to an agent. So that's a real challenge that many organizations that I'm speaking to are trying to solve. Now, of course, AI is in my title. I would say that AI is a game changer, but you might be surprised to hear me say that I don't think AI is enough on its own. I am very much optimistic. I'm brutally optimistic about what we can do with artificial intelligence, but I do not believe that it is a silver bullet or a magic wand that can solve all of our problems. Not as humans, not as a society, and certainly not in the contact center. And on that note, something I wanted to, I guess, talk about is, what is AI? Now, I don't know how many people are sort of history students on the call today, but the term artificial intelligence actually was coined in 1956. So it has been around for almost 70 years. And what artificial intelligence looked like back in the 60s is obviously very different to what we see today. And there was a lot of excitement when Artificial launched. I say that as if I was there. Obviously, I wasn't, but from all accounts, it was a really exciting time in history. But what we saw was that there was all of this buzz and all of this momentum and hype around artificial intelligence and what it can do. We're going to have robot servants. We're going to have flying cars. It was going to be the Jetsons, right? Um, and all of that expectation really meant that we fell into an AI winter between the 70s and 80s because there was all this expectation and the technology couldn't deliver on it. Now, as we moved through the 80s and the 90s, we had access to the internet and computing power. These models that were created way back in the 60s when we were trying to map the way that human brains think. We started to get more power to apply to solving those problems and doing the math. Come the 2000s, we get big data and deep learning. We have neural networks breaking through. We have convolutional neural networks and all of those exciting terminologies around recurrent and sequence analysis. And so we saw a big explosion there. And that's where we started to go into the mainstream in the 2010s, where we had deep learning. So AlphaGo, which beat a human at Go, which many scientists and mathematicians thought to be impossible. It was inventing moves, and we were moving into a new world where AI was going to be smarter than humans. And then, of course, we had it in our technology, right? We have Siri, we have Amazon, we have Alexa, and so we have this AI companion that we've had since the 2010s, mid 2010s. Now we move into 2020s with ethical AI, GPT, customer experience AI. We've got generative AI. It's all we hear about. ChatGPT is stormed our universities and our high schools. Our kids are writing emails and reports using ChatGPT, and they're asking their C-level parents, hey, are you guys using ChatGPT in your business? And so we're starting to see this real federation of AI across many different use cases all across the globe, not just in the contact center, of course. But what does that mean? Well, as we move forward and as we find more and more use cases for this type of technology, we're going to see personalization at scale. So highly personalized experience, meaning that you as an individual's experience will be different to someone else's experience, and AI will be able to underpin that. Of course, across any channel that you want, it'll be a seamless customer experience from SMS to WhatsApp to Apple Business Messaging to voice, back to email, whatever that channel, will have a seamless experience supported by AI and predictive customer service. So being able to predict the needs and proactive support requirements for customers, being able to transition them from reactive to proactive. And so this is where AI really unlocks a lot of value for organizations. And so how does that fit, right? How does that fit within, I suppose, the current landscape? Now, you see a lot of investment in many organizations around digital self-service. You see beautiful websites being rebuilt. We've got fantastic logins and self-service portals. We might have a mobile app. You're seeing digital marketing come through, links coming through on Instagram. You're getting served ads all the time. And there's a lot of value in that because it's a very it's a very scalable way to engage with more and more customers out in the market. But what about when that experience breaks, or there's a question, or a customer is confused? Well, we want to help them, right? So we have AI assisted customer service. So how can a chatbot get involved? Do we have a voice bot in an IVR? Can they help us solve a problem? Can they give us access to knowledge? Can we solve something with an FAQ? No, okay, it's a bit more complicated than that. We need to move to a human assisted engagement, which is really sort of that contact center environment, which is that assisted service where we have access to all of these tools that surround our agents around quality interaction, insights, call summarization, real-time compliance, agent assistance, access to knowledge, expert knowledge, and things like that. And then, of course, there's fulfillment of whatever is discussed on that call. So there's always need for workflows and business processes and back office orchestration. So this is really where we're seeing, this is kind of the continuum along which CX AI and automation is starting to weave itself into these different areas of the way that we engage across a customer's life cycle. So I want to sort of zoom out a little bit and talk about the current state and what different elements of analytics and metadata and information that we collect from customers through interactions can start to form out and build out, I suppose, the building blocks to what AI sits on. And this is not from the perspective of one particular product. This is from the perspective of the approach that we take as technology platforms to solving this problem. So of course, we've got our interactions, right? We're having a customer try to solve something for themselves. Now, we expand that out, we've got the channels that can happen through. As I mentioned earlier, we have a number of different channels that customers will try to resolve their queries on, or or buy something from, or escalate a complaint, or whatever it might be. So we can gain that information. Which channels are they coming through? How are they contacting us? What's working for them? Then we overlay things like conversations. So what are the intents that we're finding from these calls? What are they trying to achieve? What's the first level intent? It might be a billing inquiry. And the second level intent is my bill is too high. And the third level of the intent is I don't understand my bill. There's a random charge. So how do we understand different levels of intents? And also what is being said in the conversation? Those tiny little circles there are utterances and particular words and phrases that are used within a conversation. How can we capture that and use that to feed into a model, an AI model, an analytical model that's going to help us gain better insights into our contact center? Then we can add and enrich it with metadata. So things from external case management platforms, CRMs, ERPs, whatever other systems sit within your organization, because a conversation on its own without being linked to other data that sits within a system of record kind of sits on an island. So there needs to be a link between that conversation and what kind of information we have sitting within our other systems. And then of course, what kind of insights can we drive and what kind of further actions can we take off the back of that interaction? Can we optimize our workforce a bit better? Should we look at reducing the amount of agents or increasing the amount of agents? Should we look at transferring some agents from digital to voice or vice versa? What is the sentiment? Is it positive? Is it negative? Are there coaching opportunities? Are there quality management opportunities? Is our compliance okay? So this is where we're starting to build out a very rich tapestry. It starts with just a conversation or an interaction through a particular channel and then build out there. And we get this really rich tapestry and quite granular insights about what's happening within a conversation between a customer and an agent. So I'll touch on why knowledge is important in a moment. And I want to use an example of what happened to me in preparation for this particular session. I wanted ChatGPT to help me provide a humorous but professional summary of my career and what I've done. And so ChatGPT very kindly said, I'd be glad to help. I'll keep the tone humorous and professional. Give me the link and I'll provide you a summary. Great, I thought, I'll provide the link. Sent the link. Now, ChatGPT came back and said, actually, I can't access web content, including LinkedIn profiles. So let's just make something up. Let's just create a humorous and professional summary based on a fictional character that happens to share the exact same name as me, called Ben Hancock. So apparently I start as an underwater basket weaver to being a leading figure in tech innovation. And along the same lines there, I was a cheese rolling coach. So it takes that and it starts writing a summary for me, or this fictional character, Ben Hancock, about what my career has been. And it's completely made up, but none of this has happened, right? As much as I would have loved to have been an underwater basket weaver, none of this has actually happened in my lifetime. So I interrupted and I stopped it and I said, well, you asked me to share a LinkedIn link to fulfill the task, but you can't access links. So why did you tell me that you wanted the link, or that you could use the link? And the answer is really interesting. I see how that was confusing and I appreciate your patience. So, well, thank you for validating my concern, ChatGPT. That's good use of language there. My initial request was a misunderstanding. Isn't that interesting? This AI has said, my initial request was a misunderstanding and I can't do what you originally asked me to do. But what I can do is if you provide me the right information, I can help craft or refine content based on the information that you provide. And that's a really, really critical point. So if you don't provide these LLMs, and this is just an example of ChatGPT, it could be Google Gemini, it could be Meta's Llama, it could be any of the LLMs. If you don't provide it the information, it can hallucinate and make things up. And the thing that I want to point your attention to is this little bit down the bottom. ChatGPT can make mistakes. Consider checking important information. this is a really critical point that I wanted to make sure we spend a little bit of time on. Is this is where knowledge is critically important. If their knowledge is accurate and up to date and version controlled and brand aligned, and the LLM that you might use for a FAQ bot or for a chat bot is only referencing information from that, then you've got no problem. But the really interesting part of this little disclaimer is consider checking important information. And what we've seen out in the market is many organizations are just plugging ChatGPT into their website saying, here is all the information you need. Go out and start being a customer service agent, start being a virtual agent. And the fact that it says consider checking important information. Well, from my perspective, if I'm running a business, every answer that I give to a customer is important information. So I don't want to have to rely on the customer double checking me and validating if I'm saying the correct thing or not. I expect that my virtual agent will do that for me, right? So that's why knowledge is so critically important. And I'll give you an analogy to sort of wrap up this little subsection of the talk here. Is in many organizations, knowledge has varying levels of, I suppose, let's call it freshness. There's some stuff that's 3 to 5, 10 years old that may or may not still be relevant. And then there's things that articles and content that's created every day, and it's fresh and it's up to date. It's got the right wording, it's got the right brand image, it's got the right content in it. Now, imagine that if you were to just point an LLM at your knowledge base, it's like having all of that. It's like it's food in the fridge. So you've got food in the fridge that's a couple of years old, and you've got food in the fridge that's very fresh. And you're basically saying, hey, take all of this, put it in a smoothie, and you're asking your customers to drink it. Now, you don't know whether you're drinking the fresh stuff or the really old, rotten, moldy stuff. And that's the big risk when it comes to exposing large language models like ChatGPT to public-facing knowledge and accessing the public internet, is that it can hallucinate, which I think is a great word to describe making things up. It can make things up just trying to be helpful. So I might just pause there for a moment, Fran, if there's any questions that come up.
Ben, there was a question there in relation to what is a large language model. So do you want to just give a little bit of insight? I know you've kind of covered off what LLM is, but again, the requirement for this to actually contribute to the outcome that you've just demonstrated.
Yeah.
What is it?
Wonderful question. So a large language model is effectively what it sounds like. To use ChatGPT as an example, when ChatGPT launched GPT-4, I believe it's been trained on 170 billion features or attributes, which is to say that it's been provided with a labeled data set of 170 billion pieces of information. And effectively, what a generative pre-trained transformer does, which is a GPT, is that it will find connections and associations between the language used in these different types of formats. We are talking about text only here, so it will look for patterns, it will look for similarities, it will find connections between different pieces of information and different topics. Don't forget, it can also do things like coding, and it can do testing for things like medications. So basically, transformers are the next iteration, I suppose, even though it's a completely different approach to neural nets, where it can take large, vast amounts of information, it can consume it. If it knows what it's looking at, which is why we label it, then it is able to provide, I suppose, a synthesized version of that information back out to you as an answer. So we've seen this, right? Most people on this call have probably experimented with ChatGPT. You can give it a long email or a book and say, summarize this for me, and it will pull out the key points. Now, that is very complicated, what happens in the background. And I'm probably not the right person to really drive that down into its constituent parts in the most simple manner. But effectively, what it's looking at is a vast database, and it's finding, I suppose, the way to recreate styles of conversation, the way we interact with each other, and using natural language. And it can generate natural language based on input. So you say, hey, can you do this for me? It says, yep, no worries. And it spits something out. That's effectively what a large language model does. Now, the really interesting part and why knowledge is important, I suppose, to avoid the situation that I just showed, is it needs to know what the parameters or the guardrails are that the large language model can exist in. So a large language model by itself can't really produce anything until you tell it what to do. So you need to give that large language model a prompt. You need to say, do this, say that, provide me this, summarize this. So effectively, you need to have your knowledge and your information in the right architecture to be able to create what's called a vector database. Now, without going into the details, vector database effectively finds linkages and interrelationships between articles of knowledge. So when we search that, we can say, yes, we have a piece of knowledge that matches that question. We bring that together. We pass that to the LLM, which you see down the bottom there. It can be OpenAI, Azure, Google, Llama. And then we make sure that that fits within the brand constitution. So if you ask a effectively designed large language model chatbot a question that sits outside of its realm of knowledge. So for instance, if you asked an airline what the best price on a TV is, it should say, sorry, I don't know how to answer that question, right? Because it's outside of its bounds of knowledge. It doesn't sit within the knowledge base of an airline. If, however, you ask the airline bot, hey, what's the price to upgrade a economy seat to premium economy? It should know that, and it should be able to tell you because that sits within that knowledge base. So if really we need to have that orchestration layer there, we need to do a sense check that is this question, is there an answer to this question in my knowledge base? If yes, pass the relevant pieces of information to an LLM to summarize and then pass that on to the customer. Does that make sense, Fran?
Yeah, no, I think that's actually a really nice way to put it. And I think, your example actually demonstrates some of the limitations when it's not actually tailored for, whether it's a specific industry or
Yep.
behind firewalls for an organization, et cetera, et cetera. So I think it, really highlights the kind of, there's this big opportunity to bring it all together, but actually you've really got to do some thinking and some, design and really structure that architecture behind it to make sure it's relevant and you don't throw out some of that hallucination and, misinformation.
And it's accidental misinformation. That's the
Yeah,
thing.
yeah.
These LLMs, and we've seen a bunch of small consultancies and small software developers come out to market saying we've got a chatbot for you, and all you need to do is point it at a URL, and away it goes. That's the exact approach of taking the food, as I mentioned, in the fridge, creating a smoothie, and then giving it to your customers. Really, that's what that is. Because if it can't answer the question directly, and it doesn't have rules around it, those guardrails, then it will just create something that sounds right, as you saw in this example of it's a summary. It's provided a summary. It's talking about a career. It's about a person named Ben Hancock, but it has nothing to do with me or my career. So
It's
it's
filled the
trying to be
gaps
helpful.
creatively, hasn't it?
It's filled the
Ben, we've
gaps
got a couple of
creatively.
really good
Yep.
questions here. We've got
Sure.
one here, and it's specifically around the ability to influence or design that LLM. So the question is there a way to influence LLMs or create the guardrails to ensure information references specific sets? I think you've touched on that a little bit. So
Yeah. Yeah. The
again, it's
guardrails.
about, yeah.
Yeah, sorry if I can answer that, because I think that's a really critical point that doesn't get spoken about enough, is that AI management is knowledge management. So, I get this question a lot around, how do I trust a chat bot? How do I trust an FAQ bot, without having to conversationally design and hard code every question and answer, right? Because there's a lot of overheads that comes with that. So LLMs provide a lot of flexibility in the way that people interact with it. We don't have to hard code every different variation of an answer. So for instance, like with dates, you've got 02, 05, 1981. You might have that, or you might have 2581, or you might have 2nd of May 81. There's all of these different ways to write a date of birth, for instance. Now, LLMs, you don't need to do that. You don't need to provide all of the different variations. You can just say date of birth, and it knows what a date of birth is and will be able to figure out that those 8 numbers or that particular format is a date of birth. So forget about that for a moment. the way to control and make sure that AI is not saying the wrong things and that we don't sort of bring too much risk into our brand is by getting your knowledge right. So if you have the guardrails around knowledge and you make sure that your LLM or your chatbot is only pulling answers from your knowledge base, then it can never say something that's not true. So the onus then becomes on the organization to say, well, how fresh is our knowledge? And do we have the right management tools from a system, from a platform or from a process perspective to be able to manage knowledge in the right way? Because there's a big difference between, I suppose, a knowledge repository and a knowledge management system. So there's obviously tools and insights and age content reports and who accesses what and what's the most highly rated, all these sorts of things that are important, particularly from an agent perspective, right? Which articles are agents accessing the most? And is that impacting their conversations positively? Are they getting the right answers from these articles? And is the NPS of those conversations high? Therefore, should we suggest that article more? And do we want our virtual agent friends over in the digital world, do we want that to be the most referenced article for them to answer questions? So being able to link all of these things, but it really comes down to making sure that knowledge is in the right format and in the right spot, and not open to the public internet to just make things up.
Thanks, Ben. I think that's really good. There's a question here from Kylie. Do we think AI will be able to interpret sarcasm in the future? I mean, we've seen it progress a whole lot in relation to tone and, emotion and the rest of it. Sarcasm, I mean, it's an interesting one.
Well, Fran, I know a lot of humans that still can't process sarcasm.
So do I, and I was going to say that, but I thought it's actually not relevant. But yeah,
I think
maybe defeats the purpose.
Yeah, I think whilst I think that may be a tongue-in-cheek question, I think it's actually quite an interesting one. I speak about this quite a lot. The way to analyze and use AI in the right way is actually a combination of both structured and unstructured AI. So when I say structured AI, I mean things like machine learning models that are built and trained specifically in a particular vertical or use case, right? You might have a model that's trained specifically on vulnerable customer behavior or complaints detection or sales effectiveness. There's all of these different models that can be trained on a large data set to recognize patterns of speech or patterns of conversation from both agent and customer that says, hey, I think there might be an issue in this conversation, and raise that to a supervisor. So this is not new technology. So a combination of that overlaid with a natural language understanding model like an LLM gives you 2 or 3 sort of different variables to say, is that customer really being genuine with what they're saying? Because based on everything else they've said, they appear unhappy. And now they've said this thing that sounds happy, but it doesn't make sense, right? So it's kind of a contextual clue, I suppose, is the way to think about it. Do I think it'll be as effective as humans at understanding sarcasm and all of the different variations between, Australian sarcasm, American sarcasm? I think sarcasm should be its own language. Maybe, I hope so. I think with all of the investment that we're seeing in building these out, I'd say it'll get there pretty quickly.
Yeah, for sure. A question here around, can you train ChatGPT?
Well, you can't change ChatGPT's model. You can train it by giving it access to the right information. ChatGPT is the consumer-facing version of OpenAI. Many organizations, NICE included, we have enterprise licenses with OpenAI and other LLM providers. So then you get into things like the architecture, so information architecture, making sure that we're not, that we're cordoning off our version of that LLM. Once you have a version of it, of course, you can do your own stuff to it. But ChatGPT, the public version, you can train it through prompt engineering. So you can tell it to be a particular type of chatbot. You can say, okay, ChatGPT, you are an ineffective chatbot. Now answer this question, right? And it will answer it as an ineffective chatbot. So There's a lot of really humorous examples of where people have used prompt engineering to create, I suppose, um, outcomes from chat GPT that maybe weren't intended. So yes, you can train it from prompt engineering, but if you are using this in a enterprise operational space, it's a different approach.
Cool. Okay, we might move on and we'll
Yep,
keep those questions coming, guys.
absolutely. So let me just build this out. So I suppose if you look at the three key areas of AI sort of business use cases, it really comes down to consumers, employees, and the business. So from a consumer perspective, sorry, from an employee perspective, really where we're seeing AI being applied is in agent assistance. It's in, we want real-time suggestions, we want knowledge articles, and we want it to be accurate, right? Within context. We want our agent assistance tools to be able to provide, articles that might be helpful, or even provide an actual verbatim written response in a conversation to say, here's an answer to that question that the customer just asked. Either you send that straight away, or you can make your own edits and use that. And here are the links that I've used to craft that answer for you. And so what we're really wanting to create from agent assistance tools and all the investment that NICE is making is really around having that little digital co-pilot that sits next to the agent and says, you know what, I'll take care of that little menial task. I'll go find that article for you. I'll send that email about the upgraded flight, whatever it might be. And it really is aiming to reduce cognitive load. It's making their lives simpler, more effective, but it's elevating humans to do what humans are really good at, which is, of course, solving problems, creating great relationships, delighting customers, improving NPS, resolving complaints, reducing escalations, and allows the bot to take away some of the more menial BAU tasks that we can do with agent assistance. So if I move on from employees to the other side of the fence of consumers, we're looking at chatbots, FAQ bots, right? We're looking at the ways that AI-assisted virtual agents can really help customers achieve something. Can I change my address? Can I update this scheduled appointment? Can I inquire about a stock? Can I look at this particular property? Whatever it might be, whether it's a chatbot, which is typically we say a chatbot is a conversational bot where you can actually have a conversation with it. It's a bit more free flowing, and maybe it can do something. It can update a system, or it can send a thing. And an FAQ bot is really just sort of providing links. Maybe it provides a little generative summary that says, hey, here's the answer to your question, Fran. You might say, how many eggs does a creme brulee need? And it will say, Fran, your creme brulee needs 6 eggs, and here's a link to a recipe. Right? That's an FAQ bot in the new world using generative AI. And we really just want them to be helpful and useful. We don't need them to be human-like. We don't expect them to be our new best friend, at least not yet, but we just want them to be helpful and useful and effective. And last but not least, of course, is the business use case. So how can we use AI and conversational AI to be able to provide insights and outcomes and look at actions that we can take holistically across our businesses? So imagine a world where a team leader, a supervisor, a manager, an executive could log into a platform and say, how do I improve my NPS today? Or which of my agents are doing the best at our new sales campaign? And being able to ask those questions in a conversational way, natural language. How can I do better as a supervisor today? Where should I focus? So being able to ask these questions in a conversational way and get real insights and actionable sort of next steps that you can take in order to achieve the outcomes that you're looking to achieve. So none of that works, though, of course, unless you have the right data underneath it and the right knowledge underpinning it. So I suppose kind of bang on time, Fran. The real key takeaways here, and maybe we can pause here for a few more questions, then I can run through key takeaways. I'm flexible. I've got time.
Good timing. Good
Yep.
timing. There is a great question here in relation to, and I think you're going to talk a little bit about it when you talk about key takeaways, but what you suggest for organisations trying to balance the ethical considerations, which we know is coming up a little bit in the media at the moment, that come with integrating AI while still striving to deliver that individualized CX experience. So they're specifically talking about the integration of data across various platforms, particularly in industry where customers disclose health information, personal
Mm,
information, vulnerabilities, etc. You touched a little bit on before around those
mm,
guide rails, but equally, how can you utilize information that's then actually not accessible by anything else other than behind firewalls and things like that. So how do
absolutely.
you actually balance some of those considerations, and what would be your recommendations on first steps in kind of understanding how to approach it? Because
Mm.
this is what I think a lot of members are really grappling with at the moment.
Yeah, I think the ethical question is a really interesting one, right?
Yeah.
Ethics in anything, you end up with a couple of different camps, right? Like if you look at the next couple of generations of the Zoomers and Generation Alpha, they're living in a world where they've never really experienced online privacy, right? They've been giving their email address and their data across the big platforms since they've had a phone. And so there's an ethical question around would you willingly give away your personal information if it meant that you got a better discount on a product or you got better recommendations? That's an ethical question around how much data you want to give away. There's also the ethical question from a business perspective around how much data do we want to pull into a machine or into an engine in order to make our experience the most personalized it can be. There is a balance between really knowing your customer and bringing together the relevant pieces of information versus the creep factor of maybe knowing a lot about a customer that you need to know if you're in healthcare or if you're in finance, knowing a lot about that customer, but maybe choosing what you do and don't leverage as part of maybe an outbound digital marketing campaign using an AI engine to suggest that. So there's a lot of it's murky waters, right? There's a lot of organizations globally trying to work on, I suppose, what an ISO looks like,
Yeah.
international standards organization looks like for AI. And it's moving so quickly that we're starting to see um, challenges with regulation and legislation keep up with the pace of technology development and innovation. So that's a really interesting space. I suppose my steer on that is when we're looking at the way that AI is applied across customer engagement, there's a couple of different areas where it makes sense. If we can understand a customer's online journey because they're logged in and we can more effectively serve that customer and help that customer because we know who they are, we know what products they have with us, we know the last time they contacted us, and we know that maybe they're a happy customer or an unhappy customer, then what we can use that information to create a better experience for that customer. If we are using that information instead to proactively market to a customer in a channel that they're not expecting it from, perhaps that's maybe not as an ethical use of that information that we're getting from customers. I'm not sure where many organizations land in that. And I think this is a kind of a quickly shifting space. Locking down customer information, making sure that we don't collect PII or PCI information. So personally identifiable information or credit information from customers across these channels is really critically important. But also when we think about digital channels, the way that customers are engaging with organizations through digital channels, like they're a friend or family member in an asynchronous way, they're providing first party data to organizations. They're providing the permission to use that because they're engaging in that conversation. And organizations can use that effectively to solve customer problems and reduce friction in that conversation. So maybe I'm an optimist. I try not to be too cynical about this space, but if we take the right attributes from customer journeys through digital channels, through voice, and through CRMs, and we can bring that together and use the right elements of that, there needs to be some design thinking. What problems are you trying to solve? What use cases do your business particularly have to bring that together? But I think it's very much a case by case basis. But it all very much starts with where is your knowledge and what kind of data exists about your customer base.
It's the old good versus evil, Ben, isn't it? We've got a number of sort of bodies being put in place to support and advise government in Australia
Yep.
on ethic cases and where that goes, but they're all still really early stages. And,
Absolutely.
as you were talking, then it sort of makes you think about knowledge of a consumer subgroup, particularly if it's around vulnerable or elderly, there is an opportunity for some of the bad stuff to actually then tailor and target, you know, particular groups. So I think that we're going to see some of those advisory groups pushing conversations more rapidly as that starts to expose. But look, I think it's a
Mm.
challenging one that we'll just, have
Well,
to
I think,
really.
on vulnerable customers, right? I think that's a really great example because we've been speaking to a few banks recently, and vulnerability and I suppose duty of care is becoming a really hot topic of conversation, and a real focus from a lot of organizations. We saw Optus is hiring a VP of customer care from a duty of care perspective. If we are able to use machine learning models to understand in the moment that this customer may be risk of hardship or vulnerability or a victim of domestic abuse, whatever that might be, then that's a really positive use case for this type of technology, right? Because we can provide help to that customer in their moment of need without them having to say, I'm going through something really hard. We might be able to get in early and prevent a customer moving into hardship because they're showing early indicator signs. We are only able to understand that when we've consumed millions of labeled conversations and we see patterns in conversations that we can then apply to that conversation and recognize patterns. We say, actually, this is fitting the pattern of somebody who's in a vulnerable position. So, hey, my suggestion is maybe transfer this through to the customer care team or whatever it might be. So in that scenario, it's a really positive use case of that technology. Yeah.
Yeah. Sadly, there are people that would look at the contra of that as well, though, right?
Of
And
course. Of course.
and that's the obligation, I guess, that the good, I guess, has there. Now, look, we've got lots of questions here, Ben, so I'm going to quickly have a
Yep.
look at them.
Shoot.
I think Joe's got a couple there around, we all have our disclaimer on the phones that says it's being recorded. Is it time to update that and now saying your data's being analysed? I actually like that, Joe.
Oh, that's
That's
an
an
interesting
interesting
one. It's a
one.
can of worms. Yep.
Yeah. But the question here in relation to LDA topic modelling and whether they work accurately with raw conversational data. So would it be considered ethical without consent? Interesting.
So you repeat the start of that question, sorry,
In your
Fran.
opinion, can
Yep.
LDA/topic modelling work accurately with raw conversational data? And would it be considered ethical without consent?
Large topic modeling or large language modeling on raw conversational data. Is that the
Yeah.
question?
Yeah.
So the question, okay, two sides to this. What I definitely wouldn't do is take your raw conversational data and send it to ChatGPT. That would be a massive breach of data security, to take that and send it to an open, it's called Open AI for a reason. It is an open platform, open to the public. So I definitely wouldn't do that. What we're seeing from a NICE perspective, we have a solution called Auto Summary, which effectively provides a summarization of calls and can send that somewhere that you want it to go. The reason I mention that is we're taking raw conversational data right now and running that through both a structured and unstructured analysis where we're using models and generative AI together to provide an output. What we have seen from generative only is that it is good, but what it misses is those critical CX use cases where we're able to, I suppose, exclude elements of the conversation that aren't relevant, right? So if there's a conversation up front about the weather and, how good the surf is today, and, before we jumped on this webinar, we had a bit of a preamble about what everyone was up to. We don't really need that, right, for a contact center operation. So it's about the use case of what you're actually trying to analyze with that raw conversational data. If you want contact center outcomes and customer experience outcomes and quality and compliance outcomes, then it's a combination of structured and unstructured to be able to understand that in the right way. So I don't think that you can just dump conversational data into a large language model and expect it to know what you're looking for as a contact center professional. It needs to have some guardrails around it.
Yeah, I think so. Ben, I might get you to take us through the key takeaways. We've
Yeah,
still
sure.
got a few questions there, so we'll come back to those with time. But I'll just make a call out to everyone. If you've got questions, still put them there, and we can get Ben to follow up on those. And when we send out the link to the recording, we can also answer any that are
Sure.
specific. But equally, I'm sure that Ben is more than happy for people to reach out and learn a little bit
Reach
more
out on
about
LinkedIn, of course.
platform and what you guys are doing to
You
actually
might be
navigate some of these challenges.
yeah, you might be disappointed to find out that I'm not actually an underwater basket weaver when you see my LinkedIn. So look, the critical takeaways, there's only a couple. There's a long list here, but there's really only a couple that if there's anything you remember from this webinar, it is that AI management is knowledge management. If you get your knowledge right, then any AI that you put over the top of it, as long as it's locked down and architected in the right way, will give you the right answers. So it's the old adage of rubbish in, rubbish out. If you have that knowledge managed in the right way and curated and structured accordingly, then your conversational AI and agent assistance tools will only provide the right answers. So that is critical takeaway. And I don't think that that's something that's spoken about enough. I think we've got a lot of people out in the market talking about the benefits of LLMs and generative AI, and they're really not focusing on the fundamental building blocks of what that means. The next one I would say is that, of course, analytics are critical. If we can't measure it, we can't manage it, but analytics are critical in defining the future strategy. So if we can understand what's happening today from an intents, from an actions, from an outcomes perspective, then it will really allow us to plan for the future when we look at sort of future investments as an organization. One thing I hear a lot is, is AI here to take jobs away from humans? Absolutely not. What humans are really good at, as I mentioned before, is being humans. We're really great at creating, we can hear when someone's smiling when they talk. We can build relationships. We can build rapport. We can delight customers. AI is not there yet, and I really don't think that we should be relying on it yet. So AI really is here to augment humans and to take away, the high volume, low value type of inquiries that what many agents deal with on a day-to-day basis. And of course, from a digital perspective, it really does allow customers and brands to meet customers in their channel of choice. It allows agents to be able to operate in an asynchronous manner, which reduces stress and it improves attrition and it provides better scale. And implementing these things does not have to be big bang. It can be small, it can expand. We can start with a use case or two. We can start with a particular set of knowledge and only expose that. There's a bunch of different ways that this can be sort of tested and learned out in the market. I wouldn't expect that many organizations can kind of throw down cash on the table and say, right, we're going to be digital and AI centric now. So it is something that needs to kind of happen incrementally. But at the very early stages, if you do anything as part of your AI strategy, getting your knowledge in shape and having it in the right structure and the right platform is critical to making sure that your AI strategy works.
Thanks, Ben. They're great takeaways. We're going to get to a couple more questions. And I just want to call out, if people have questions and they're on there, you're still up for the best question from Ben. So he'll actually look at all of the questions, whether we've asked them or not. But there's a couple here in relation to what are you seeing? So what are some creative or novel ways that you are seeing organizations use AI or automation to a positive effect? Another one here is saying, in your experience, where organizations are doing it well, how are they resourcing their teams to develop the AI tools, or are they just relying on partnerships? There's a few things there around what are you seeing that's working well.
Yep.
You've given us some great insight there into some small opportunities as far as start small, but equally, this is we say it's not replacing agents, but it might actually shift what some of your people need to be focused on when you think about getting knowledge management in shape, building some different skills and tool sets to actually, be ready when this next iteration occurs for them.
So there's a couple of questions there. I'll try to answer them succinctly. I suppose from a roles and profiles perspective, there's a role of in the market now, people are calling themselves prompt engineers, right? So being able to write effective prompts to engage with LLMs. So that didn't exist 12 months ago, and now people are saying, I've been a prompt engineer. I'm an excellent prompt engineer. Well, maybe, but also it's reacting to the market. So just be careful of that. Generative AI experts are coming and going all the time. It's moving so quickly that it's difficult to keep up and stay abreast of everything that's happening. When we're looking at an AI strategy, there are a couple of critical things. Yes, partners who are working in this space that have that sort of vast access to resources, that really important, and that's one way to go for sure. Within an organization, having developers that maybe are skilled in a different area of technology can be reskilled, right, into this space. So it's not necessarily having to go out to market and paying an immense amount of money to someone who's a generative AI developer. There's a lot of transferable skills from development teams that currently exist. Where there's a lot of opportunities, I suppose, is in CX journey mapping, CX strategy, conversational strategy. And what that really means is, how do you want your organization to conversationally interface with your customers, right? It's not about designing the back and forth turn by turn conversation. It's about how do you want that to actually operate at scale. So that might mean, do you want your chatbot to have a bit of humor about it? Do you want it to be a very serious chatbot? Do you want it to tell jokes, right? So all of these things are options that you can make a critical decision about. And so we've seen some really great, to answer the second question, we've seen some really fantastic implementations of AI with booking holidays, with being able to help with mental health use cases. So giving people the ability to triage conversations and get them through the right person that can help them with their very specific personal situations. I think where I would typically advise an organization to start is, how do we just get routing right? How do we use conversational virtual agents to just, at the very least, if there's one thing that it does, is that it puts customers in front of the right team or in front of the right agent within a team. And if we can then say, okay, great, we're doing that right, can we have it answer some questions, like I mentioned around the creme brulee? Answer my question, provide me the link, and sort of start incrementally building it out from there. Going big bang and expecting a bot to be able to do 50 different use cases or 50 different intents day one is a recipe for disaster. I would say maybe pick 1 to 5 of those use cases that are high enough volume to make an impact, low enough complexity that it's not requiring integrations with 10 different systems, but has a high NPS and a low AHT. So that's really, like, if you can find high volume, low AHT, high NPS, low complexity, those are perfect for automation, because it doesn't take an agent very long to do. The customer is usually satisfied, and we're not risking any business value by automating this, right? So start there, and then we can build out with complexity and sophistication.
Ben, great advice. I'm mindful of time. Thank you, everybody, for all of the fantastic questions, and for, Ben, a session that really covered a whole lot of information that I'm pretty sure, by the level of questions that we had, have really actually fueled some different thinking. And I really thank you for that. I thought it was a great session. For everybody, thank you as always for coming along. We will send it out, the link to the recording. We'll also have any questions here that weren't answered. Ben, I'm going to push on you to actually get us some responses to those. But again,
Absolutely.
thanks everybody. Enjoy the rest of your day. Ben, we'll see you again soon, no doubt.
Thank you, Fran.
Thanks,
Really
everybody.
appreciate your time. Thanks, guys.